Welcome to the 10th episode of Masters and Matches with me, Arne Moll.
And me, Peter Doggers. Arne, today we're going to talk about an English grandmaster who was among the best in the world in the 70s and 80s. And as I understand, you met him and you even played him online, right?
Yes, we're talking about Tony Miles, a legendary British chess grandmaster. I did indeed meet him once in Groningen 1997. He was watching an analysis of my game against German women grandmaster Bettine Trabert. And he was standing next to the board and he was very interested in the game. It was a rook ending in which I was a pawn up, but I managed to lose it. And he commented on the game and said, yeah, I also played once a rook ending with a pawn down and I also won it. And he was generally very active in that analysis. And I also played against Tony Miles online on the Internet Chess Club in the late 1990s. His handle, his nickname was It's Only Me, and that's an anagram of Tony Miles. So yeah, good reason apart from this personal anecdote to talk about Tony Miles, especially because he was a very interesting player. He had a fantastic fighting style, and I think especially his way of looking at chess openings is very inspiring. I played some of his openings myself, the English defense, for example, but also the Nimzowitsch defense, one knight c6 after the move e4. And we'll come to some of those opening ideas that he introduced and that he propagated. But yeah, maybe we can start with telling a little bit about the biography of Tony Miles.
Yes, let's do that. Well, as I said, Miles was really one of the best players in the world in the, I think mostly in the late 70s. And unfortunately, he died way too young in 2001 at the age of just 46 from a heart attack caused by diabetes. But let's start from the beginning. Miles was born on April 23rd, 1955, which is in fact St. George's Day in Britain. And we'll come to that later. He was born in Edgbaston, a suburb of Birmingham. And as a kid, he liked to play rugby and cricket and swimming and athletics. But as it turned out, he had a special talent for chess. In 1968, he became the British under-14 champion, and then in 1971, he was the under-21 champion. So in those early 70s, he really was one of the most talented British players, alongside, for example, Raymond Keane.
Yeah, and I think the rivalry between Keane and Miles was, in subsequent years, a big thing in the British chess scene. And maybe it started with the 1972-1973 Hastings Christmas tournament, when Jim Slater, he basically said that he would pay £5,000, which was a huge sum of money at the time. It was the equivalent of around £80,000 today, maybe 85,000 euros. He would award that money to the first British player who would become grandmaster. And both Miles and Keane would, of course, compete for that prize in subsequent years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this Slater, he was a famous businessman at the time because he had also contributed to half of the prize money of the Fischer-Spassky World Championship.
Yeah, and actually after that tournament, Miles' career as a chess player really took off. In 1973, he won the silver medal at the World Junior Championship. He was actually not happy with it. He writes somewhere that he felt disappointed. But the year after, in 1974, the World Championship for juniors was held in Manila, and he would win it this time as the first Briton to do so. So that was a great success, and he was already a very sharp player at the time, playing attractive chess. I believe he played the dragon defense in this, the dragon opening in this time. That's a very aggressive opening setup. So he was already playing fighting chess then.
Yeah, and in the fight between Keane and Miles, it was Miles who ended up winning that quest for becoming the first British grandmaster. After scoring the 2 norms that were necessary in those years, he scored his first norm in the London 75 tournament, and the following year in 76, he scored his second norm in Dubna in the Soviet Union. So yeah, 1976, Miles' first British grandmaster at the age of 21.
Yeah, really impressive result. And he was, as mentioned, he was the first UK-born grandmaster to do so. There was actually one earlier British player. He was actually born in Germany, Jacques Mises. He moved to the UK later. And he was awarded the Grandmaster title in 1950. But for this particular quest, he didn't count.
Yeah, and things were moving fast from Miles, because you could say that maybe already in that year he quickly jumped to world-class status as well. He also won the big Amsterdam IBM tournament in '76 together with Viktor Korchnoi. And yeah, I think you can really say that Miles was actually best of the West for a few years before Jan Timman took over that unofficial title, right?
Yeah, that's something that not everyone knows, but he was definitely the strongest player of all the Soviets in those days.
Yeah, and speaking of Soviets, he also started to beat some of those world-class players from that mighty Soviet Union. For instance, the former world champions Smyslov, Tal and Spassky. So yeah, some really good achievements there. But it was a famous victory against another, actually the reigning world champion of the day, that really got Miles his world fame in the chess world.
Yeah, definitely. He was not a junior player anymore by then. He was already 25. But at the European Team Championship in Skara, he played against Anatoly Karpov. He was the reigning world champion. And he had black. And he was really searching for a way to surprise Karpov after e4, which was not easy, because Karpov was the best prepared chess player in the world. And then he came up with something truly amazing, because after e4, he played the move 1a6, which looks like a ridiculous move, and maybe it is, but it was the right antidote against Karpov, because ultimately he managed to win that game. And it's funny to read what Miles wrote after the move a6 in an article he published. So he wrote after the move e4, Karpov is always at home in well-known theoretical lines, so it's best to avoid them. A couple of years ago, I had a ridiculous idea of an all-purpose defense to anything, but as yet had not found a suitable opponent to test it on. Now, I decided, was as good a time as any.
So the bloody world champion was suitable enough, right?
Yeah. He played a6, and then after d4 he played b5, and he writes, by this time the spectators laughing was becoming embarrassing. So people in the audience were really laughing at what Miles did. And I think that's actually it's a good example of Miles fighting chess, because he didn't care that people were laughing. He didn't care that Karpov probably looked at him like he was crazy. He just wanted to fight and to play a game. And maybe he was one of the players who considered chess to be a boxing match. It's not about playing nice and playing pretty, but it's about who wins. And in the end, Miles won. Karpov could not. Maybe he could not stand the pressure, or he was too angry to play normally. But in the end, it was a victory for Tony Miles.
Yeah, and it had a bit of a different ending as well, because as Miles wrote himself, when I beat Karpov with 1a6 and 2b5 at the European Team Championship in 1980, he did not resign the game personally. The Soviet team captain signed the score sheet. I heard from others that he felt insulted by my choice of opening.
I must say, maybe as a small digression, I was quite inspired to replay this game again a couple of days ago. And when I then played a club game last Tuesday against a strong opponent, I also decided to play 1a6 against e4. Although I lost, but it was still a great game, and very, very interesting play ensued. And maybe also good to mention that later this opening 1a6 got the name the St. George defense, and that is actually the birthday of Tony Miles.
And it was named because of that, I guess, then?
Yes, I think partly. I think there may have been other reasons, but this was definitely one of the reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so if you wonder how deep our preparation for the podcast goes, then, you can see that we are even playing the openings of the players that we are discussing.
Yeah, indeed. It's very inspiring.
So a few years later, let's talk about the year 1984, when two interesting things happened for Miles. For starters, he set a new European record for blindfold simultaneous games. He played 22 games simultaneously without seeing the board. And that is actually quite an impressive achievement. I didn't even know that Miles was into blindfold chess. What about you?
Yeah, well, he wrote something about it as well. He wrote a lot actually when he had the opportunity, and he also wrote about this experience. I think he writes that he was not even sure he could do it because he said he wasn't particularly good at blindfold chess or memorizing positions. But he had a whole sophisticated method of remembering the positions and the games, quite complicated. I don't even know exactly what he wrote, but he managed in the end, and he got the record, right?
Yeah, he did. By the way, he scored 10 wins to 2 losses and 10 draws, which is very decent, I would say. Anyway, still in 1984, Tony Miles also scored one of his very best tournament performances of his career. He finished on 8 out of 11 at the Interpolis tournament in Tilburg in 1984. That was a tournament sponsored by a insurance company in the Netherlands with almost only world-class players. And Miles finished 1.5 points ahead of the field. For example, Robert Hübner and Vladimir Tukmakov, Zoltan Ribli and Alexander Bolyavsky tied for second place. And then the other participants were Lubomir Ljubojevic, Lajos Portiš, Jan Timman, Ulf Andersson, Vasily Smyslov, Gennady Sosonko, and John van der Wiel. So, yeah, really strong tournament.
Yeah, really strong.
When you say Tilburg and Miles, even more famous is the 1985 tournament, but we'll discuss that later. Yeah, how strong was Miles actually by then?
Yeah, so by January 1986, he was the number 9 in the world. He had a rating of 2610, and that was his best ever position. Soon he would be maybe overtaken or joined by other British players such as John Nunn, John Spielman and Nigel Short. But around that time, he was the number 1 for England at the Chess Olympiads in Thessaloniki and Dubai in 1984 and 1986. And he helped the team to deliver silver medals at both of those events.
Right. So basically a strong top 20 player, for a brief moment, a top 10 player in the world. But as I understand, when he played a match against Garry Kasparov, he suffered a bit.
Yeah, he lost horribly. He scored only half a point out of 6 games and lost the other 5.
Yeah, that was in May 86. Yeah.
Afterwards, he had a famous quote. "I thought I was playing the real champion, not a monster with 1,000 eyes who sees everything." I think in some versions, actually, it was 100 eyes or 22 eyes, but a lot of eyes in any case.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's how many players must have experienced playing against Garry, right? It is, It was a bit, it was overkill sometimes.
Yeah, maybe people feel the same about computers now.
Around the mid-80s, there was also maybe a first kind of big scandal from which we started to realize that, Miles clearly didn't avoid controversies and clashes with colleagues, especially in the British chess scene. He had many clashes with Keane and Short and others. And yeah, something happened in the mid-80s that would have quite a big effect on him, I would say, I think. And it had to do with Raymond Keane and the interzonal tournament in 1985 in Tunis. So the thing was that Keane had claimed to have acted as Miles' second, for which he had received a payment from the British Chess Federation. However, Miles publicly announced that Keane was not his second and felt that the British Chess Federation did not investigate the matter fully. By the way, I'm quoting Jeff Lawton here from the book It's Only Me. He continued, "The controversy escalated and Miles commenced legal proceedings, which never reached court, and went so far as to indicate that he did not wish to be considered for future English team selection. In fact, he transferred his allegiance to the USA. However, the dispute took a heavy toll on him. His sleep was badly affected and he suffered a period of ill health, which forced him out of chess for a few months."
Yeah, I think it had a very bad effect on Miles in this period. He became mentally quite unstable and I would say maybe even obsessed with the whole affair. And I think there was an incident also in 1987 when he was arrested at Downing Street. And he wanted to speak to Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the UK. So yeah, it was really a bad situation for Miles at the time. He was hospitalized after that arrest. Yeah, I think ultimately he recovered, but that was a bad period.
Yeah, and as said, he joined the U.S. Chess Federation for a bit and played a few tournaments there in America, and also ended up playing in the Australian Championship in 1991 before eventually returning to England again.
Yeah, so after the 80s, Miles continued to have some quite successful chess tournaments. For example, in Sevilla 1993 in Spain, he had a 2800 performance result, and he received a standing ovation for the fact that he had won the tournament. And afterwards he described this as the tournament of my life so far.
Yeah, he continued winning quite a few tournaments. I'm not sure if they were on the same performance rating level, but he was, for example, winning several tournaments at Capella La Grande in 94, 95 and 97. And he also did quite well in the PCA Intel Rapid Chess Grand Prix in London in 1995, when he knocked out Vladimir Kramnik in the first round and Luc van Wely in the second. Eventually, it was his English teammate Mickey Adams who stopped him from continuing even further.
Yeah, I think Miles was a fantastic tournament player. He was really a fighter in open chess tournaments, and he was always competing for prizes. This is also where his taste for offbeat openings came from. If you want to be successful in open tournaments, you have to not only play the standard repertoire, but also quite a bit more exotic chess openings. And he did that very much. He always experimented, especially with black, actually with very unorthodox ways of playing the opening. And that brought him a lot of success, even against stronger players.
Yeah, because he did it not just against weaker, but he played those weird openings, wacky openings against the world elite, right?
Yeah, he played, for instance, the Owens defense, 1e4, b6 against strong players. And later in his career, he also tried things like in the Caro-Kann, e4, c6, d4, and then knight a6, with the idea of playing knight c7 later on. And, those kind of things was typical Tony Miles. He just wanted to get a position, no real theoretical fights where he could maybe be out-prepared, but just get a playable position and then start fighting.
Yeah, this, by the way, reminds me of his other black victory against Anatoly Karpov, which was in 1983 in Bath. This game was part of a tournament intended for broadcasting on the BBC for the program The Master Game. In the end, it was never broadcast on English television because the people at the BBC were on strike at some point, and so it eventually was only broadcast in Germany. But yeah, in this tournament, he also beat Karpov, and it was a Caro-Kann with knight c3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, and then knight f6, knight takes f6, g takes f6, which these days also is a little bit dubious, but yeah.
Very sharp.
For Miles, it didn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And he beat Karpov again.
Yeah, he also tried some interesting openings ideas with white. For instance, in the Queen's Indian, he played the move 4 bishop to f4, and he played that really in a lot of games. I think he beat Spassky with it twice, for example. So that was really quite a good success for him, and I think it's still called the Miles variation.
Yeah. Well, to finish some of the biographical details, we can say that his last tournament victory was the 2001 Canadian Open in Sackville, New Brunswick. And then he also entered to play for the 2001 British Championship in Scarborough. But he had to withdraw before the final round because he was not doing well. He was not feeling well. And then he would play 2 more games before he passed away. Those were short draws in the Four Nations Chess League. And then on November 12, 2001, a friend found his lifeless body at his home in Harborne, Birmingham. And apparently Miles had died from heart failure related to his diabetes.
Yeah, I think in the book It's Only Me, there are some in memoriams written by friends of Miles in which they write that in the previous days he was still at the local chess club. So he really was playing chess until the very end.
So let's talk a bit more about Miles as a person, because, that's one of the reasons we chose him for this episode. He was a really interesting character, actually. And, for example, it was Genna Sosonko, the Dutch-Soviet grandmaster, who, he's a pretty good writer himself. He described Miles as a master of the laconic barb, the sarcastic remark, and he was never at a loss for words. Yeah, and I believe also in his writings, he really wasn't afraid to attack other chess personalities, right?
Yeah, for instance, he didn't shy away from even attacking the strongest player, Anatoly Karpov. Well, he beat him also in that game we described earlier, but he also wrote an article called "Has Karpov Lost His Marbles?" in which he basically accuses him of several inaccuracies around, facts that didn't turn out to be facts after all, and just pointing out things that didn't happen as they did. And I think in that article, he also says that Karpov, in one of the tournaments, came to him and said, well, actually, you're right. And he then wrote an apology. But even in the apology, there were further mistakes that Karpov made. And Miles wrote about them as well. So he really was quite precise when it came to these kind of things. And there were other chess grandmasters as well that he wrote quite strongly about. So, a very strong voice.
Yeah, at the end of the podcast, we will also mention a few book reviews from Miles, in which he also didn't mince words, so to speak. His most famous book review, of course, was that of Eric Schiller's book, Unorthodox Chess Openings, which Miles described just in 2 words, which were utter crap.
Yeah, and I think if anyone was allowed to write those words about a book on unorthodox chess openings, it was definitely Tony Miles, because he was the absolute master of unorthodox chess openings.
I also found a nice description of Miles by the American grandmaster Larry Christensen. He wrote, "Tony Miles was a true original. He was a fighting player with a wicked sense of humor who amassed a vast number of chess brawls against some of the world's finest. I first met Tony Miles in 1973 at the Lone Pine event. He would drink quart after quart of milk during his games and go through an elaborate and distracting routine of writing his move down before he played it, hiding the move with a large watch, often crossing out his original move, and after making his move he would then loudly honk and blow his nose and jadoob the pieces on his opponent's time. Needless to say, these traits did not endear him to many of his opponents, but most players made allowances because of his good humor and very creative brand of play."
Yeah, I think if you're honest, then you have to say that Tony Miles was probably a little bit annoying behind the board. I think maybe these days people would call him a bit of a hate smith, as they say, because, writing down a move and then hiding it with your watch and also actually playing A6 on the first move could maybe be considered to be quite annoying behavior. But he got away with it.
A bit more from Jeff Lawton. What was Miles's board presence like? Well, his posture at the board was fairly typical of many players. He held his head in his hands, with his elbows resting on the playing table, and he covered his ears. He worked immensely hard at the board. "That's the way it developed over the years, and now I can't do otherwise," he said himself about this. "It looks very concentrated, but I could just as well go to sleep. Sometimes when I'm tired, I close my eyes. Then I lower my hands a little so that nobody notices."
Yeah, another quote from It's Only Me. "He was a frequent winner of weekenders, due in no small measure to the physical strength and sheer persistence, and was by now, to all intents and purposes, a chess professional. Miles's chess style was once described as a street fighter's. He said, I used that description once because I learned to play chess mostly at weekend tournaments. 6 rounds in one weekend, and you have to win all of those games. So that means you have to fight. Even if there's no way to fight, you still have to find a way to win. But just fighter is enough. You can drop the street."
Yeah, I think Donner called him a bulldog, right? Or a bulldog mentality.
Yeah, he wrote that Miles was a good player with a bulldog mentality.
One more paragraph from It's Only Me really describes that Miles was just a very different thinker than the usual chess player. For example, against Anatoly Vaisser at the Elista Olympiad in 1998, Miles played a game so bizarre that it appeared as if his sense of humor had taken over completely. "That's my nature. I am not very serious when I play. I mean, I do concentrate, but that is only a part of it. I have a strong tendency to look at crazy things first. When promoting a pawn, I prefer a bishop to a queen, if that's possible. I'm very fond of, let's say, 3 rooks on the board. In a weekend tournament I had that once, and instead of resigning, my opponent allowed himself to be mated beautifully in the middle of the board. That appeals to me."
So I think now is a good time to look at Tony Miles' most impressive and best remembered tournaments of his career, which was the Tilburg Interpolis 1985 tournament.
And anyone who knows a little bit about this tournament will immediately think of the photographs of Miles at the chessboard, because during most of the games, he was actually not sitting on a chair, he was lying on a bed behind the chessboard. An amazing and weird image, and very odd thing for his opponents. And yeah, just one of those famous episodes from the chess history in the 1980s, that Tony Miles was playing from a bed his games and ended up co-winning the tournament, right?
Yeah, it was definitely maybe his best achievement of his career.
Yeah, Miles ended up tying for first together with Robert Hübner and Viktor Korchnoi, ahead of Lyubojevic, Polyevsky, Romanishin, Timman and Dzindzichashvili. But why was he on that bed?
Yeah, Tony Miles wrote an article in the New in Chess magazine after the tournament describing what happened. And he starts by explaining that we have to go back all the way to basically when he was born, because he had spine issues from his very early youth onwards. He twisted his back when he was 15, when he was playing cricket, so that didn't help either. And he often wore leather bands to support his back, and he took painkillers already at young age. And then during the Tilburg 1985 tournament, the problems got really serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it started by him explaining that during one of the early games, I believe somewhere maybe around 3 or 4, he was actually looking for an adjacent office in the Interpolis building, and he found one, and he just started lying on the floor, just to give his back a little bit of relaxation, right? And Lyubojevic actually noticed it, and he came in and he's like, what are you doing? And Miles said, this is my latest yoga exercise. But yeah, always humorous, but he was not actually in great shape, and he needed physiotherapy during the tournament. He was meeting with chiropractors. He also called his ex-wife, Yana Malipetrova, who, by the way, was first married to international master Bill Hartston, and then to Miles, and eventually to Robert Bellin. But she was also a doctor, and she tried to help him by advising which painkillers he might be able to order in the Netherlands. So he was trying to do a lot of different things, but the problems just didn't go away, and he was really hurting.
Yeah, and around that time, it was the tournament organizers themselves who came up with the idea to arrange some kind of a massage bed, although it was more like a research table from a hospital, I think, to arrange that next to the board and have him play the games from there instead of from a chair.
Yeah, and he started playing games on that bed, for example, against Lyubojevic and also against Korchnoi. And yeah, he actually started asking his opponents to what extent they were actually bothered by it. And apparently Lyubojevic said that he wasn't really that much bothered, only for the first few minutes. And yeah, for example, Korchnoi said that he was actually affected by it. He said he felt like he was playing against a handicapped person. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, and then after that, some kind of protest was launched by a number of players, namely Lyubojevic, Dzindzichashvili, Korchnoi, and Hübner. And basically they said, well, is it really so bad? Because we saw him sitting down. It resulted in a big scandal or controversy at the time.
Apparently Lyubojevic and Korchnoi were quite strong in their feelings about this. Miles wrote the following: during the closing dinner, Timman told me that Korchnoi and Lyubojevic had approached him twice, trying to explain to him that he had been distracted by me without realizing it. So they were sort of trying to find more supporters for their case, but in the end, only half of the field had a problem with it, right? Yeah. And when Miles asked Timman, for example, how he felt about it, Timman said something like, "Well, I was mostly preoccupied with the position itself." So, and then in one of the other rounds, the organizers had decided that this board of Miles and the bed should be placed in a separate room, but they hadn't contacted Miles' opponent about this, and that was Oleg Romanishin. And Romanishin didn't like the idea at all of playing in a separate room, so then everything was put back in the normal playing hall. Yeah, and then another issue appeared during that game when Miles suddenly felt kind of drunk during the game. And then he realized that the doctor had prescribed him hallucinogenic drugs. So, yeah, Miles decided to drink liters of black coffee to deal with that.
After that, the tournament organization organizes a meeting for everyone, for the arbiters, for the players. And some really funny things happened there. For example, Korchnoi, he remarked that, well, there are all kinds of tournaments. There are tournaments for women, there are tournaments for blind people, there are tournaments for handicapped players, but this was a tournament for healthy players. And then Jan Timman remarked that, well, in normal tournaments, women, blind people, and handicapped players are surely also allowed to participate.
Right. Probably silencing Korchnoi there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was actually one of the four players, Robert Hübner. Afterward, in his article, Miles sort of wrote that he actually kind of understood and sort of didn't really have a problem with Hübner protesting because, yeah, he knew that Hübner was just a very sensitive player and he kind of felt sympathy for him. So he didn't have an issue with that. And maybe also this was also related to the fact that their mutual game, so the one between Miles and Hübner, was kind of short and sweet and arranged and pre-arranged quite amicably, I believe. Do you have more about this, Arne?
Yeah, so they had even discussed the idea to play a pre-arranged draw with the arbiter. And initially, I think they wanted to play just 2 moves, just to get it over with. But then Geert Gijssen, the chief arbiter, said, well, at least make it 5 moves. And then they played the following moves. Try to picture this in your mind. It's going to be wild. So Tony Miles was white, and he opened with 1d4, and Hübner answered e5. Miles took on e5, d takes e5, and then Hübner played the move queen h4. Miles replied with knight f3, attacking the queen, and Hübner went to a4 with the queen. Miles attacked the queen again with knight c3, and Hübner stepped away to a5 with the queen a5, and then Miles played e4, and then a draw was agreed.
Yeah, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but Hübner's play in this game was also kind of an echo to one of Miles's games with black, which he played in 1978 in the Reykjavik Open tournament, when after d4, Miles played e6, and then after c4, b6, so that is already the Owens defense, right? And then when the white player played d4, d5 on the third move, he also replied with queen h4 already in that position. So the kind of thing where you say, don't try this at home. He wasn't shy of moving his queen early in the opening, and in this case, Hübner did the same.
Indeed. Yeah, one aspect of Miles, we already touched on it briefly, but he was a great writer. He could write very humorous and funnily, and he wrote a lot. He analyzed his own games, and he also wrote about tournaments, but he also wrote a lot of book reviews. And actually, those book reviews were quite inspiring to me always because they were very sharp and very critical. And I liked that a lot. And he was very funny in describing some chess books that he didn't like. But I have a very funny quote from a tournament that he played in Hastings, in which he kind of completely destroys the tournament. So he writes, "In my opinion, it is Hastings' ever-growing reputation as one of the worst tournaments in the world. Where else could one find a chess tournament of any kind played directly underneath a pantomime to the accompaniment of organ music and the thundering of hundreds of tiny feet? Add to this the noisy demonstration boards, the traditionally foul weather, the necessity for keeping a supply of pennies and a few other oddments, and you will see why Hastings is not the most attractive place for any player who is free to choose. Even the leading English player no longer take part."
Yeah, of course, famously one of the longest running tournaments in the world. Hastings is still going, always during Christmas time. Maybe it had to be Miles to be so critical, right, of something organized in your own country.
Yeah, indeed. He didn't care. So here's another funny example of Miles' writing. He often opened after 1e4 with either knight c6 or knight f6, so playing a knight rather than a pawn. And in this case, he describes a game. He starts the analysis of a game he played in 1995 against a player called Garcia. And you have to understand that the logo of the previous sponsor of this tournament was a black horse. So that's Lloyds Bank, which, by the way, happens to be my current employer. And Miles writes the following after 1e4, knight c6. "Considering the amount of PR work I do for black horses, I find Lloyds Bank's decision to end its sponsorship most ungrateful. Last year, it appealed to my sense of humor to try and win the Capablanca Memorial with Aljegin's defense. I scored 2.5 out of 3 with it. This time, I changed horses and got half a point more.
Yeah, and then there is also I have an excerpt from a review he did on a book by John Nunn, very respected writer, I must say, and also one of my favorite writers. But apparently there was one of his books that Miles just found way too dry. So yeah, we're talking about the early 90s when John Nunn wrote a few books that were mostly based on newly available table bases. So he focused on endgames with very little pieces. And thanks to these table bases, he could write endgame books with almost no errors, right? For the very first time ever, you could write a book that you would be sure of that it would hardly contain errors because the analysis was just available and based on the truth from the table base. But yeah, maybe not the most lively kind of books. And Miles wrote about one of these. It was Secrets of Minor Piece Endings, so a book about endgames with knights and bishops, or knights and bishops versus bishops and a few pawns. And Miles wrote about this book in the magazine Kingpin. And he, by the way, he uses John Nunn's nickname Doc because Nunn is also a doctor in mathematics. Miles writes, "Our reviews have been getting bland lately," wrote Kingpin's editor. "Lay into them a bit. Not the easiest of tasks with Doc's books, but here goes. The cover is disgusting. A tasteless blend of yellow and black that would make the average bee vomit. And whoever came up with the sentence, GM John Nunn is a key member of the 3-time silver medal winning English Olympiad team, for whom he has also won 4 individual gold medals, deserves to, write covers for Bedford. Whoever he is, he has clearly not read the book, since he also writes, the book also provides definite answers to some of the puzzles that have taxed the greatest chess minds for centuries. Precisely when do 2 knights win against a pawn? Yet on page 265, we find that I have decided to omit 2 knights versus pawn after discovering that the pre-database work of Troitsky and other analysis is astonishingly accurate. I should explain that this is the first of Doc's endgame books that I have read, and it probably will be the last. For me, chess is a fascinating and in some way living game."
Yeah, it's a beautiful motto of Tony Miles's credo in chess, I think. He really considered chess to be a living game and not a theoretical exercise.
Yeah, all in all, a very interesting character from the British chess scene. And really a shame that he passed away so young because I would have loved to see more games and definitely more game analysis and articles written by Miles. But yeah, it was not meant to be. But we still have his many great games, and hopefully this can be an inspiration to maybe play through some more of his games and maybe read some of his old articles.
It certainly was to me. Thanks for the podcast and see you next time.
See you next time.